Around 1.1 billion years ago, the ground beneath Michigan shifted, cracked, and rebuilt itself during two separate rifting events that nearly split the continent. Those movements helped shape the waterways, cliffs, and geological features we know today, and within those formations are places most people will never see. At Fort Wilkins, the old military outpost still stands at the edge of terrain, shaped by those ancient shifts. In Grand Haven, the South Pier Lighthouse still stands along a shoreline influenced by constant changes in Lake Michigan's water levels and storms that continue to reshape the coast. And at Tahquamenon Falls, the water carries tannins released from surrounding forests, giving the falls their distinct colour as it moves across very old bedrock. Stay with me as we uncover Michigan's most extraordinary wonders, where rare discoveries and forgotten mysteries might change the way you see this state forever. Leland sits where boats once drifted dangerously close to shore during storms, earning the name Leland because strong winds pushed vessels straight toward the beach. The village took root when settlers came over from a nearby island in small boats, bringing every piece of lumber and gear they needed to start building. Each spring, the community holds a blessing of the fleet, asking for safe trips and good conditions before the boats head out. Fishermen also avoid eating the catch from their own vessels, convinced it brings bad luck for the rest of the season. Tahquamenon Falls looks like root beer pouring over rock ledges because tannins from cedar swamps stain the flow brown and create thick white foam as it drops. The upper section releases so much volume each second that it could fill a standard swimming pool in under a minute. People often call it root beer falls, and the rusty colour comes entirely from tannins rather than any form of pollution. Downstream, the lower section breaks into 5 streams that circle an island you can reach by rowboat and explore on foot. The falls are wide enough that standing at one end makes it difficult to see the far side through mist and rising foam. Its flow is extremely soft because it passes through swamps that filter out minerals, allowing foam to build higher and last longer than at most cascades. Nearby trails lead into forests where small striped animals, such as the eastern chipmunk, move quickly across the ground, gathering food. These ground squirrels can cram up to 70 sunflower seeds into their cheek pouches before rushing back to their burrow to unload. Their cheeks stretch so far that the pouches extend toward their shoulders when fully packed. They produce rapid alarm calls that can continue for half an hour to warn others about predators, even though the noise increases their own risk. When two chipmunks meet, they touch noses and sniff each other's rear ends to exchange chemical information about territory and mating. Their tails are flat and hairy rather than fluffy because they move on the ground instead of balancing in trees. They stay most active during mid-morning and mid-afternoon, but retreat during the hottest hours to avoid overheating. While these cautious foragers scan for seeds, bluebirds with rusty chests, the eastern bluebird, often perch above watching the same area for insects. Females pick partners partly by how intense the male's blue feathers look, since stronger colour often points to better health. Males bring material to nest cavities and fan their wings and tail as they move in and out to get a female's attention. They mate while perched on a branch, with the male balancing on the female's back, as both face the same way. During the breeding months, a male guards his whole territory, but in colder seasons, he protects only the spots where he finds food. Once breeding ends, they gather in large flocks instead of keeping up territorial behaviour. Some individuals raise chicks from more than one partner in a single season, even though many pairs stay together. Fayette Historic Townsite began as an iron smelting company town that consumed entire forests for charcoal fuel before shutting down when the timber supply was exhausted. Workers first constructed rectangular charcoal kilns that failed, prompting them to switch to cone-shaped versions that actually functioned. The company later added a 4-storey grain elevator and long docks over the harbour, now reduced to broken pilings poking from the water. When the furnaces stopped, residents loaded their belongings into wagons and moved out in a single dusty departure up the road. Tools and industrial gear were abandoned where they fell, and many of them remained scattered across the grounds. Today, the empty structures remain intact, with small birds like the Downy woodpecker nesting in the worn beams overhead. These birds can peck tree bark up to 20 times per second, with their brains handling forces much stronger than what would knock a human out. Their tongue wraps around the inside of the skull when idle, and shoots out with barbed tips to catch insects in the wood. Males feed high in the trees, while females stay lower, keeping separate territories all winter. On snowy days, they make new roosting holes in dead trees for sleeping, then move to new cavities in spring. When pecking, they switch between fast drilling to break wood and slow tapping to sense insects beneath. Their bills grow continuously because constant pecking wears down the tips, faster than most birds lose feathers. Agate falls drops over sandstone ledges that loggers once blasted with dynamite to open a passage for floating timber. Above the Cascade, a steel railroad trestle was built so low that train crews could watch logs crash against the rocks below. That same structure now carries snowmobiles and hikers, and it still vibrates when heavy machines move across it. Near the spray, moss thickens on the north side of boulders because constant mist keeps that surface damp, even during dry spells. Below the falls, river otters navigate the fast water and hunt fish gathered in small eddies where the current suddenly slows. These otters can hold their breath underwater for over 8 minutes while chasing fish through muddy rivers where vision is limited. To protect themselves while diving, they close specialised flaps over their ears and nose and lower a clear extra eyelid, like built-in goggles. Entire families move together in a line, taking turns sliding down mud banks on their bellies to quickly return to the water. While searching for food, they may travel over 10 miles in a single night, revisiting familiar hunting spots and marking rocks with droppings to navigate. They often sit upright on their back legs and use their front paws to crack open crayfish shells while feeding. Their whiskers detect the slightest movements in pitch black water, enabling them to catch fish without relying on sight. The American robin, on the other hand, moves into soft soil to hunt for worms that have risen toward the surface. This bird tilts its head not only to listen, but to observe subtle shifts in the dirt with one eye, then strikes exactly where the worm bends below. Its chest colour stands out in a flock, helping other robins judge strength and condition before selecting a mate. In short grass, they run a few quick steps, freeze suddenly like a toy, and jab the ground so fast that most people miss the capture. Families sometimes form loose feeding groups, with one bird giving sharp calls if a predator approaches, allowing the others to keep foraging. On hot days, robins stand with their beaks open and wings slightly lifted to release excess heat without seeking shade. At dusk, they gather in large roosts, with younger birds learning safe sleeping spots from older ones before many migrate along the same flyways. Central Mine was a remote copper mining village with rows of simple houses, a school and a tall church overlooking the shafts. The mine cut narrow stopes that followed thin copper veins, meaning workers occasionally stepped over pure metal while making their way to the face. From its elevated position, the church allowed miners to spot the steeple, both from the shafts and from many of the scattered company homes. Among the district residences was a yellow house that once held several boarders in tight rooms with shared stoves and minimal privacy. An arched stone entrance guided visitors toward the industrial core, framing views of rock piles, hoistworks and engine buildings. The powder house stood apart from the dwellings, constructed of thick stone, so that any blast would be directed upward rather than toward the village. Nearby, a building with a short tower once handled ore moved by rail and tram, and the entire area still shows the demanding and hazardous life of mining. Kitch-iti-kipi is the largest freshwater spring in the state, with 10,000 gallons of water rising every minute from cracks in limestone below. The spring is nearly perfectly round, and so clear that ancient tree trunks coated in lime sit 40 feet below, alongside giant trout swimming through swirling columns of sand. A white raft floats on a cable in the middle of the spring and has a glass window in its floor, allowing riders to look straight down while turning a large wheel to move across. The water remains so cold that it rarely freezes, even during the harshest winter, which many believed gave it healing properties. Legend says a young chief ended his life in the icy water after heartbreak, and people began calling it the Mirror of Heaven to honour his spirit. One businessman once sold the spring water and sand, claiming they could cure ailments, later admitting that most legends were fabricated to attract visitors. The forest above stays quiet most of the day, except for the red-eyed vireo, whose tireless song carries through the trees without pause. These birds sing more than 20,000 times in a single day during breeding season, continuing even through the hottest afternoons when most other birds go silent. Their eyes are brown at hatching and gradually turn blood red with age, though the colour is often hidden as they stay high in the canopy. They hover under leaves to catch insects from the underside, while constantly moving through branches, with males feeding higher than females to avoid competition. A magnetic compass in their body guides them across thousands of miles during migration, but if they become too light, crossing water, they follow the coastline instead. Fort Wilkins is a frontier military post built to monitor a copper rush area, with neat rows of white buildings surrounding an open parade ground. Soldiers and their families lived in nearly identical frame houses, each with simple interiors and porches facing the central yard. Log structures stood nearby for storage and work, their rough walls marking the fort's earliest construction before boards were added. Old wheeled equipment, such as carts and gun carriages, line the street running between barracks and the guardhouse. A tall flagpole rose from the centre, with the flag visible from the Lakeshore and the rough wagon road leading to the fort. The post experienced long stretches of calm, with drills, guard duty, and supply runs filling most days instead of combat. Later, the location was left quiet and then restored, allowing the aligned houses and blockhouses to illustrate how a remote garrison lived and worked. Pictured Rock's National Lakeshore became the first national lakeshore ever established, protecting cliffs that rise 200 feet straight out of the water. Minerals seeping through the sandstone stain the walls in streaks of copper orange, iron red, and manganese black, which is why early explorers called them pictured instead of painted. People once believed grotesque imps haunted the sea caves beneath Grand Portal Point, and sailors would call single words into the hollows until the sounds returned warped and unfamiliar. The archway at Grand Portal was once wide enough for boats to pass through the cavern, but the entire roof eventually collapsed and dropped into the lake. Water freezing inside porous cliff faces creates ice curtains so thick that climbers now scale frozen waterfalls during winter festivals. Fur traders travelling past the cliffs tossed tobacco into the water as offerings because the waves hitting the caverns sounded exactly like cannon fire. The sandstone keeps crumbling from freeze-thaw cycles, and towers break off into the lake during spring and fall before the debris drains into Lake Superior. This lake stays so cold that bodies that sink never come back up, because bacteria work too slowly to create enough gas. The water below 200 feet remains at 39 degrees and doesn't change, even when the surface heats up in summer. Ice that once covered the lake every winter now melts sooner, warming the water and feeding algae blooms. Some sailors once believed the lake was bottomless and alive, thinking strange sounds under the hull were the lake itself, warning ships to turn back or shift towards a safer route. The Isle Royale. This island sits on a fold of volcanic rock that mirrors the Tahquamenon Peninsula, and both contain some of the earliest copper mining sites ever excavated by humans. Ferries from Copper Harbour drop visitors at Rock Harbour, where a white lighthouse still towers above docks that once served commercial fishing boats. The cliffs along the shore reveal yellow gold flecks of greenstone, a rare gem that forms chatoyant turtle shell patterns, which collectors once removed extensively until the park prohibited it. Beyond these isolated forests, a proud winged predator darts along, the Merlin. These falcons catch prey in mid-air by flying under 3 feet above the ground, using bushes for cover until they burst into speed and strike unsuspecting birds. Their hunting technique is so intense that they pursue birds driven out by larger hawks, and they confront raptors 10 times their size to defend their territory. Males have slate blue plumage, while females remain brown, and both lack the moustache stripe found in most other falcons, making them difficult to identify until they begin a chase. These winged animals also soar over the towering Grand Sable dunes, massive sandhills perched above a long cliff of rocky terrain. The dunes sit on old glacial debris along the shore, with bare sand slowly sliding toward the water, while clusters of hardy trees cling to the ridge. Storm winds push fresh sand up the slopes each year, covering old tracks and fallen trunks so completely that yesterday's paths vanish overnight. Because no permanent homes were built on these shifting hills, the dunes stayed mostly untouched, making them one of the cleanest, least disturbed dune fields along the big lake. Point Betsie Lighthouse was built on shifting dunes that began eroding its foundation within a year of operation. Officials once called the tower miserably done and proposed replacing it with a taller structure, yet no reconstruction occurred and the original tower remains in place. Keepers maintained an unbroken routine because the fuel lamp had to remain lit from sunset to sunrise without During a severe storm, one worker waded through heavy waves to save an entire ship crew, returning afterward to learn his wife had given birth while he was away. Holland is a lakeside city founded by settlers who wanted a town that mirrored the look and customs of their homeland, complete with canals, gabled roofs and wooden shoes in shop windows. Its most remarkable feature is de Zwaan, a functioning windmill transported piece by piece from overseas and rebuilt so its massive arms now grind grain atop an artificial island. On the old campus grounds, Hope College hosts The Pull, a fierce tug-of-war where students lie in muddy pits as teams across a river pull until one side is dragged into the water. All of this takes place each spring, just as the town buzzes with anticipation for the tulips that will soon bloom around the windmill and streets. They were planted to transform the entire city into a garden, and now yellow, pink, white and orange blooms fill parks and canal edges in spring. Their bulbs remain buried through winter cold, then emerge so densely that workers arrange colour blocks carefully to prevent each street from appearing as a single shade. At Windmill Island Gardens, tulip beds form rings and patterns radiating outward from de Zwaan, so photographs capture the mill surrounded by a pool of colour. When strong wind passes, the flowers bend in waves while the windmill rotates, making the petals and blades appear to move together like one large spinning field. Sleeping bare dunes, National Lakeshore stretches along a long shore with towering sand hills, former farm sites and forest trails for visitors. Families once harvested timber during cold months and then turned to crop fields and dairy work when the logging trade slowed. The dunes shift gradually over buried trees while grasses and low shrubs cling to the slopes, and hikers climb them to watch the changing light over the water. Motorised rides at the site were stopped after vehicles carved ruts and harmed the fragile sand surfaces. However, in winter, visitors sled and slide down the tall faces like snowy hills, ending near forest edges where white-tailed deer forage. These mammals have coats that appear reddish during warm seasons and grey in colder months, with a long tail that is white underneath. When startled, they raise that tail and bound away in high leaps, landing lightly on the tips of their hooves. Adult females often travel in small groups, pausing to stand and observe together before slipping back into cover with a few quick jumps. Fawns remain hidden by lying still in dense vegetation while the mother feeds, later following her along daily paths through woods and open fields. In colder months, several family groups can merge into larger herds that cross open terrain at dusk, with older females guiding younger deer to safer feeding areas. Mackinac Island is a small tourist town where cars are mostly banned, so people get around by horse-drawn carriage, bike, or on foot, and streets echo with hooves. The main town runs along the harbour with wooden hotels and shops, including a long white waterfront building where visitors once arrived from the docks. Long ago, the island lay between two fur trade regions, and soldiers built a hilltop fort to monitor every ship passing through the narrow straits below. Today, the harbour fills with ferries, yachts and tall ships simultaneously, and foghorns sometimes overpower church bells when water traffic grows heavy. The roads wind past quiet cottages and grand porches, and residents recall late-night bike races where riders coasted downhill with no lights, narrowly avoiding horse-drawn wagons. At the edge of town, boats leaving the harbour pass a red and white tower on a rocky point, the lighthouse that guides vessels through the channel. This structure stands on a bare, jagged corner of Round Island, where ships once approached shallow shoals and needed a clear warning. Its design features a square red brick tower rising from a matching keeper's house, accented with sharp white trim, and a white base that contrasts with the dark water. After being abandoned, storms damaged part of one wall and nearly pushed the building into the lake, until workers reinforced the foundation with heavy stone to prevent further collapse. Volunteers later rebuilt floors, windows and the lantern section so the tower could shine again during special events and continue serving as a navigation aid. Moreover, the lighthouse appears in a famous island movie, prompting many boat tours to pass nearby. Lake Michigan is a long inland sea of fresh water, lined with dune hills, rocky points and harbours that turn quiet fishing spots into busy port towns. One area, called the Lake Michigan Triangle, became known for strange disappearances of ships and planes, with some people blaming unusual lights, compass problems, or sudden fog. On rare clear days, the water is so transparent that pilots can see entire wrecks glowing blue from the air, as if trapped under glass. In fall, the forested bluffs along the shore turn red, orange and gold, reflecting on calm water so sharply it looks like an upside-down forest. Sudden storms can appear quickly, stacking steep waves from different directions, which is why sailors treated this lake with the same caution as the open ocean. Sandbars near river mouths shift often, making charts quickly outdated, and captains learn to read watercolour changes to avoid shallow spots. Along quiet stretches of shoreline, hunters and birders watch winter sand ridges and open ice edges for a pale predator sitting low and still, the snowy owl. These nocturnal animals wear thick white feathers that cover their legs and toes, giving soft edges that help them blend into the snow. They cannot move their eyes inside their skulls, so they rotate their heads in wide arcs, pausing to judge distance before striking. When taking off from snow, they push up with broad wings in slow rowing strokes, leaving clean prints where their feet and wingtips touch. Their flight is quiet because the wing feathers are soft and fringed, letting them glide low over fields and ice before dropping onto prey. Young birds have more dark bars on their bodies, and as they mature, some turn almost completely white, helping them disappear across frozen flats. In years when food is scarce farther north, they move south along large lakes and islands, sometimes perching near Sulshwa Point Lighthouse. Sulshwa Point Lighthouse is a shore beacon where storms throw spray high enough to strike the lantern glass and shake its metal frame. Inside, worn steps dip in the middle from keepers' boots, recording the exact number of trips made between the oil room and lantern level. Red-roofed keeper houses were positioned so near the tower that people could reach workrooms in only a few strides during sudden squalls. Many visitors report hearing heavy footsteps on the tower stairs when no one else is present, and some avoid climbing alone after dark. Others claim they notice the scent of lamp oil or cigar smoke in clean rooms, as if former keepers still followed their old routes. The fog signal once burned enough coal that black dust covered nearby snow, darkening the station yard throughout winter. Ship crews learned to rely on this single light to mark a safe turning point on a coast where one miscalculation could shred a hull on rock. Wyandotte is a riverfront town that developed around an ironworks where labourers transformed raw ore into some of the first modern steel in the area. The mills and shipyards hugged the water so closely that smoke, whistles and launch horns ran continuously, with workers walking from narrow houses straight to factory gates in minutes. Downtown later shifted from industrial streets to a small entertainment corridor, as old brick storefronts became bars, galleries, and river festival spaces to keep the centre active. One orange brick square building near the core changed functions repeatedly: bank, police station, court, then offices, so residents still debate which role reflected its true character. Side streets around Orange Street are filled with sturdy brick homes and mature trees, forming shaded blocks where factory families once relaxed on porches, listening to ship horns at night. Bishop Park's dock once loaded crowds onto riverboats bound for amusement parks downstream, with children racing up gangplanks to secure the best rail spots. Parades, art fairs and fireworks continue along the same waterfront, keeping the town's rhythm closely tied to the Detroit River. It is a narrow waterway connecting two Great Lakes that forces every large vessel in the region to pass through its active channel. In earlier times, its numerous islands and bends created a smuggling route, allowing small boats to slip through side channels at night to avoid customs patrols. Large freighters now share the passage with fishing craft and tour vessels, and their wakes can hit seawalls hard enough to spray people on shore. The river once froze thick enough for cars and ice roads, but warmer winters have made such crossings rare. Chemical plants and factories discharged waste here for decades, until clean-up regulations prompted a gradual recovery, allowing some species to return to areas once considered lifeless. Lake Huron is one of the large inland seas that holds sunken forests, old shipping lanes, and a maze of rocky islands just off its long open coasts. Early traders crossed its wide middle as a convenient route between ports. The shoreline shifts sharply from soft sand to broken limestone shelves, so a boat can leave a calm bay and minutes later scrape past cliffs that plunge straight into cold water. Turnip Rock is a huge stone column here that formed like a vegetable, with a narrow base and a flat top. People once chipped pieces from it for souvenirs, so protective measures were needed before the undercut stem weakened any further and risked bringing the column down into the lake. In several bays, old stone-filled cribs from vanished docks create sudden shallow spots that only seasoned sailors know how to avoid under full sail. Because of these shifting waters and hidden structures, the area provides quiet hunting lanes and perches for a secretive nighttime hunter, like the long-eared owl. This bird looks slim with long wings and tall facial discs, yet its most familiar feature is the pair of feather tufts that stand upright and give it a constantly alert posture. Those tufts are not ears. The actual openings sit unevenly on the skull, allowing sound from below to reach each side at slightly different times and help pinpoint prey, even in darkness. Its hearing is so sharp it can strike a mouse moving under snow or dry grass without relying on sight, guided only by faint rustles and breaths. Adults stay tight against thin branches near the trunk, stretching tall until they resemble broken stubs that predators overlook. Small groups sometimes roost together in dense trees. Each bird choosing a perch above open ground so it can drop silently on anything moving beneath. Downy young with short tails practice short hops along branches, learning to balance and pounce before attempting longer flights across water or fields. At dusk, these owls leave cover and skim low over meadows near shorelines, crossing channels and wetlands that also lead toward island chains such as Les Chenaux. It is a chain of narrow wooded islands and channels that break big lake waves into calm strips of protected water. They form outlines like hooks, wedges, and long fingers, creating basins where wooden boats can anchor in still water even when conditions outside grow rough. Wooden runabouts and classic sailboats once turned the channels into a kind of slow-moving boat show, with families polishing hulls for hours just to idle past one another. During golden hour, low sun strikes boathouse walls and varnished decks so strongly that the reflections double the light, making the channels appear lined with glowing hulls. Docks become steady gathering spots at sunset, with neighbours watching the last light fade over the channels. Some boats are stored in sheds that open directly onto narrow slots in the water, so one gentle shove sends them gliding out like toys from a box. Grand Haven's South Pierhead outer lighthouse stands at the end of a long concrete arm stretching far into the lake, where waves can crash over it from both sides at once. A raised catwalk allowed keepers to reach the Red Tower even during storms, when water swept across the deck and knocked people off their feet. The inner and outer red lights line up so precisely that ship captains steer until the two merge into one, signalling they are safely in the channel. In some winters, the pier, railings and both lights freeze together into a single solid sculpture, with doors sealed under sheets of ice thicker than a person's arm span. Inside the outer light, narrow steel steps spiral around a hollow core, a design that saves weight while leaving open space instead of a solid centre. The pier had to extend far enough to reach water deep enough for ships to turn toward the river without scraping their keels on shifting sandbars. Even now, the red line of buildings and lights guides vessels, while storms continue to show why such a long reach into the lake was necessary. Grand Traverse Bay is a long inlet of the big lake, with small harbours, beaches and steep wooded hills. Its sheltered water supported the shift from small fishing camps to developing villages once boats began delivering cargo along with their nets. Orchards and vineyards extend up the slopes because the area keeps the air more moderate than inland fields. Wetlands at the bay's heads provide reeds, cattails and habitat for young fish, while higher dunes and ridges hold oak, pine and maple. Furthermore, old pilings, channel markers and half-sunk logs offer steady perches positioned directly above productive hunting areas. Those spots are often taken by dark birds drawn to fish and open water, the double-crested cormorant. These birds are dark, slim-bodied swimmers, with long necks, hooked bills and two small feather crests on the head during the breeding season. Their feathers take in water instead of shedding it, which lets them sink low and chase fish underwater, but forces them to spread wings to dry afterward. Cormorants on a log often sit with wings open, neck angled and bill raised, appearing as if they hang on a line while they dry and rest between dives. In the water, they move with only their heads and necks showing, then vanish straight down and pursue fish with powerful webbed feet. Groups often hunt together, pushing schools towards shallower areas, then rising in a loose line, while each bird swallows its catch. On channel markers and breakwalls, they stand side by side, twisting necks and snapping bills to settle space disputes. After fishing, they leave the logs and rocks to quieter hunters below the surface, such as snapping turtles that patrol the same waters. This turtle has a huge head, a long tail, and a rough shell that looks like broken bark or old rock on the pond bottom. Its jaws close so fast and hard that they can bite through tough plant stems, fish, and even careless fingers that venture too near. Most of the time it stays buried in mud with only its eyes and nostrils exposed, waiting to lunge at passing prey, while the rest of the pond treats it as just another lump of bottom. Muskegon is a lakeside city that grew quickly on lumber wealth, then had to adapt when the big log booms and sawmills closed, leaving quiet docks behind. Downtown streets once featured brick hotels and theatres for mill bosses and dock workers, and some of these buildings later became apartments with original stairways and ceilings preserved. For a period, empty factory blocks stood beside new lofts, letting people live in spaces where whistle blasts and machine noise once marked the daily rhythm. Wide roads that carried timber were later used for street festivals and food trucks, turning old truck routes into walking areas with music and stalls. Some apartments kept their faded signs and large windows, offering views over lots where stacks of cut logs once towered above rooftops. The town's life shifted from mill schedules to lakefront events, with residents gathering at museums, markets and breweries instead of lumberyards. At the edge of these changes sits Hackley Castle, an ornate home built from lumber wealth that still watches over the harbour. This mansion was said to contain so much carved wood inside that early visitors joked a complete second house could be built from its staircase alone. Children dared each other to sleep on the lawn, believing the carved faces on the trim watched anyone who stayed past midnight, similar to the duties of the Muskegon South Pierhead Lighthouse. This red tower is so narrow that keepers once slid furniture up the stairs, using ropes instead of carrying it by hand. During severe rains, waves struck the pier with such force that keepers had to secure themselves to metal rings on the balcony to avoid being swept away while checking the light. Even today, some sailors estimate fog thickness by timing how long the beam takes to fade as their vessel passes the pier, a trick still relied on when entering Muskegon Lake. This flooded river mouth once held log booms so dense that people could walk across floating timber to shorten the journey between mills. Over time, the water sometimes ran brown with bark and sawdust, creating foam drifts that piled on shore higher than wagons. On one occasion, a ship dumped spoiled fruit near the channel, prompting children to race rowboats to gather the floating crates, while adults called out from the bank. Now, some Back Bay neighbourhoods still hold block parties on shared docks, while black-capped chickadees hop along railings as if they own the waterfront. This tiny bird can recall hundreds of food caches and grows new brain cells each cold season to update its winter memory maps. Its chickadee call adjusts the number of D notes depending on how threatening a nearby predator is, turning a simple sound into a coded warning. Chickadees sometimes peck at crusted snow on branches like miniature woodpeckers to access hidden insect eggs and frozen seeds. Fledglings in backyard apple trees have been observed hanging by 1 foot while spinning, then stabilising themselves and begging for food, as if nothing unusual occurred. Their round faces and dark eyes mislead larger birds because mixed flocks rely on chickadees to detect danger first. On harsh winter nights, they can lower their body temperature and almost turn down life functions, then return to full activity at sunrise. In some dune neighbourhoods near the water, chickadees learn to snatch beach picnic crumbs and quickly return to trees overlooking Muskegon Beach. This stretch once hosted massive lake water carnivals where boats raced straight towards shore and had to turn at the last moment to avoid crashing into the sand. Old-timers still recall nights when bonfires lined the dunes and people swam in rolling waves illuminated only by car headlights parked nose first at the edge of the lot. Porcupine Mountains. Wilderness State Park is a hill region where storms have toppled so many trees that some trails feel like walking through a giant pile of pickup sticks. A long wooden walkway winds over bogs that can easily swallow loose boots, and rangers often share stories of people who stepped off the planks and needed a full team to pull them out. Scattered throughout the woods, old log camps and mine ruins remain, a wild area that once suited hardy animals like the wolverine. This animal resembles a small bear with short legs, a blocky head, and dense fur that resists thorns, insects, and harsh weather. Its powerful jaws can crack frozen bones and consume what other creatures leave behind, leaving almost nothing wasted from a carcass. In summer, it covers vast distances, scratching soil and tree bark with its claws and scent to mark routes only it recognises. Wolverines climb over rocks, fallen logs, and even low branches instead of detouring, treating each obstacle as practice. They can ascend trees to store food, tucking meat into forks of branches, high enough to keep other scavengers away. Tracks often form a straight line across ridges, bogs, and streams as the animal pushes directly through any terrain ahead. Their routes often point toward hidden basins that hold quiet waters, like Lake of the Clouds, where other species move more slowly. This lake rests neatly between ridges, and from above it looks like dark glass poured into a cracked stone bowl. On windless mornings, the surface mirrors every tree and cloud perfectly, making paddlers feel as if they are floating in the middle of the sky with no sense of up or down. Old camp stories say that fog drifting off the water can erase all sound. People have shouted from the overlook and heard only their own breathing. When strong storms hit, wind rushes down the valley and piles waves at one narrow end, transforming the usually calm lake into a shaking bathtub. Thick berry bushes and game trails ring the water, used by heavy foragers like black bears that slip in and out, leaving little more than bent branches. This species' shoulders are so powerful that it can flip large rocks or decaying logs with a single swipe, just to find grubs and beetles hiding beneath. Along rivers, it sometimes walks upstream at night, letting the current carry dead fish and scraps right to its feet like a moving buffet. Cubs have been observed standing on high banks on their hind legs, sniffing the air intensely so their noses wrinkle as they try to identify every scent drifting over the water. At the first unusual noise, they will scramble up trees and remain frozen on branches, blinking slowly while their claws hold them firmly in place. Adults occasionally climb into fruit trees and pull branches toward their chest so food falls into a pile, effectively turning the entire tree into a personal snack spot. In addition, this bear can detect food or threats from great distances using its sense of smell more effectively than a trained dog. Charlevoix is a lake town where the main channel cuts through the centre, bringing huge boats close enough that people on docks can feel the splash. Some mushroom houses are built from rounded stones and curved roofs, giving their walls and chimneys an appearance closer to stacked river rocks than standard homes. One long white waterfront building stands close to the harbour, and waves from storms have slammed directly against its foundation and deck rails. The lighthouse at the end of the pier aligns precisely with the narrow channel, and in wild weather, waves have risen high enough to cover its base and parts of the pier. The water plant draws drinking water from the same lake where yachts idle, sending treated water uphill, while raw lake water churns just outside its intake pipes. Long ago, storms tossed loose rock and logs onto lakeside decks with enough force that some walkways ended up buried under heavy piles of beach stone. Belle Isle is a full park island in the river where visitors can drive in, circle a large roundabout, and still feel completely removed from the city. The island's road network forms a rough triangle along the edges, and it has even served as a street racing course where engines thundered past quiet picnic areas. A giant glass conservatory keeps jungle warmth inside even when ice covers the river, letting visitors step from frozen air into humid, plant-filled rooms. Nearby, old boat club buildings extend doors almost straight over the water, letting launches slide from indoor racks directly into the river. Flooding occasionally pushes river water over low sections, turning parts of the roadway into shallow channels and briefly transforming vehicles into slow-moving wading craft. The old aquarium and zoo structures, with emptied tanks and pens, remain scattered across the island, hinting at the wildlife that once inhabited the park. Throughout the year, events like fireworks, races and festivals turn the island into a lively stage, yet for most days it retains the calm feel of a quiet strip of land floating between the shores. Stepping Stone Falls is a man-made waterfall on the river, built in steps so water drops over wide concrete ledges instead of one large plunge. Because the structure uses flat, boxy forms, the flow spreads out like a fan, slowing the current and creating calm sheets of water rather than a loud, vertical drop. It sits beside the old Flint water plant and reservoir, where some residents joke that the constant rush hides secrets in the river, now guarded by watchful birds, the belted kingfishers. These water hunters have large heads with a pointed bill and a shaggy crest that sticks up like spiky hair. Their bodies are short and compact, and their strong wings launch them straight into flight from a perch without any warm-up flapping. They wait on branches or railings above water, bobbing their heads as they track movement below. Once a fish appears, they dive headfirst like a thrown spear, wings held tight until they hit the surface. They nest by digging long tunnels into dirt banks, using bills and feet to carve sideways burrows that end in a concealed chamber. Around falls and dams, one kingfisher may patrol the same stretch of river each day, flying back and forth while rattling loudly to push away rivals. The Huron River is a long freshwater channel that zigzags through woods, towns and marshy low areas before emptying into a big lake. Its bends wrap around old glacial hills, leaving some banks steep with dense trees and others widened into flat wetlands filled with reeds and willows. Quiet side passages and cattail bays along this winding route create ideal hiding and feeding spots for secretive marsh birds such as the common gallinule. These animals have dark bodies, a red shield on the forehead, a yellow-tipped beak, and sharp white streaks along their sides. Their toes are long and unwebbed, allowing them to move across floating plants and mud without sinking, almost as if equipped with built-in marsh shoes. They step through lily pads, using the leaves as footing while pecking at seeds, insects and tender stems near the surface. When swimming, their legs push from far back on the body, letting them turn quickly to reach food or avoid larger birds. Chicks follow adults through dense vegetation, and parents sometimes pass food directly from the beak while standing on a single lily pad. In quiet pockets of the river's backwaters, their soft calls and gentle ripples are often the only signs of movement within thick mats of lilies. The Whitney is a massive stone mansion in the city that now hosts dinners in rooms once requiring staff just to manage fireplaces, doors and table service. The front living area contains a grand piano where music once shook the tall windows, and diners now sit only a few steps from the same instrument while enjoying their meals. From there, guests move into a dining hall with hidden serving doors, allowing attendants to bring full courses through secret halls so no one sees the path from the kitchen. Behind these partitions, back stairways twist like a private maze and connect floors so workers can move between chambers without using the main staircase. From the exterior, the structure resembles a small fortress, with turrets, carved stone faces, and pointed roofs stacked above the street to match the grandeur inside. Observers have reported chandeliers swaying and glasses rattling in empty rooms when no one walks overhead, even on calm evenings. Over the years, the same areas have hosted formal dinners, quiet meetings and late-night gatherings, all under heavy drapes, carved mantels, and the grand piano that remains, Kensington Metropark is a large area of woods, water and trails built around a long, curved lake where visitors walk, paddle and watch wildlife year-round. On foggy mornings, the water looks divided, with trees floating above dim reflections as tall birds like sandhill cranes step from the mist along the marsh. They stand on long grey legs with a red patch on the face and a straight spear-like bill suited for stabbing into mud and grass. During grooming, they run that sharp bill through their feathers and at times rub mud on their bodies, which turns the grey plumage rusty. Mated pairs then move together while foraging, taking slow steps and probing the ground before freezing in matching poses when they hear an unfamiliar sound. When it is time to rest, a crane may tuck one leg up and draw its head back until the beak settles into the feathers on the neck, allowing it to doze while still standing. As breeding season approaches, pairs bow, leap, toss bits of grass, and occasionally touch bills as if checking one another before settling down to feed again. Young birds follow the adults through shallow water and fields, copying each stab of the bill and every quick scan before taking a bite. Furthermore, cranes that search for food near woods often share the area with another loud species, the red-bellied woodpeckers. These noisy birds have black and white barred backs, pale bellies, and a vivid red cap that runs over the head like a painted stripe. Their tongue is long, sticky, tipped with barbs, and able to shoot far beyond the bill to pull insects from deep cracks. As they move along trunks and branches, they pause to tilt their heads and listen before targeting another spot. This steady hammering opens holes that reach hidden ants and beetle larvae, and they shift to new areas because older tunnels empty quickly. At the nest cavity, adults arrive with stuffed bills, exchange soft calls at the entrance, and then lean in to pass food to noisy young inside the dark chamber. After the chicks fledge, the family still returns to the same tree, using its branches as a base while they move through nearby woods in search of new feeding grounds. This is Michigan, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of the Japan, check out this video.